Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's Partner Infopedia web conference. This is Dynamics 365 Fast Track Tech Talk. Today's topic, performance optimization. Presenting with us today from Microsoft, we have Alok Singh, who is a Senior Fast Track Program Manager. We also have Nuno Cruz, who is a Fast Track Program Manager. Now it's my pleasure to hand you over to your first speaker. Alok, you now have the floor.
Yep. Thanks, Debbie. And thank you and welcome everyone who has joined us for our session on the performance optimization today. And hopefully, you'll enjoy this session. My co-presenter Nuno will also cover some topics. And with this, we'll get started. So just quickly, we'll look at what are the objectives, and the session is for 1 hour, but I'm sure we'll have some time in the end for Q&A. But if you have any questions that that need to be answered, right away, you can put them in the chat window, and Nuno will be able to provide a response. If you're not able to do that, then we'll try to address that at the end of the session. In terms of the objectives and what really we're going to be talking about today, it's going to be performance overview for Dynamics 365. Again, performance has been one of those areas where we have worked with a lot of our customers in optimizing their solution and helping improve the performance of their system. And we are going to be covering some of the learnings that we have had from our experience working with our customers. And the areas that we're going to focus on are primarily the client connectivity, looking at things like latency, and from a network perspective, what can be the impact of using our Dynamics 365 online service. We will then look at the solution optimization. So how can performance be improved by fine-tuning some of the components within the solution, and what are the best practices when you're actually developing the solutions to make sure that it's performant and end of the day your users actually enjoy using the application. We are then going to look at the code optimization. This is primarily, specifically, we're going to touch on a few points related to plugin registrations and and when you're writing your plugins, what are the best practices for performance, and also some of the things that should be avoided when we are developing JavaScripts like synchronous calls, etc. And finally, we'll just conclude and give an overview of everything that we have covered, and we'll be more than happy to answer your questions. So, and again, as you have seen in the invite, this is a level 200 Tech Talk. So it's more of an overview session where we try to cover all of these. And if you need to go further deeper and work on any specific challenges that you have within your solution, we would recommend that you reach out to your Fast Track Program Manager, and they'll be able to have a dedicated workshop for you to address your questions and concerns. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask that. So with that, I'll quickly get started and talk a little bit about the performance itself. Performance overview. What's our perspective, and how should we be actually looking at performance? So again, improving Dynamics 365 performance, and the good performance is not about just again there's a lot of in our experience, we have seen that a lot of customers and our developers think that this is an online service that's just hosted, and there's very little that as an end customer or a customizer or a partner that they'll be able to do anything with the service to improve the performance, because it's all hosted on cloud. Whatever data I throw at it and whatever the customizations that I do, it's supposed to scale and handle all of that and be performant. So, well, our service is scalable and does handle a lot of custom code and data, but that doesn't mean that performance is something that can be ignored. And we've seen that a lot of times performance comes into consideration after our customers have gone live, and when their users complain that, oh, this form takes 10 seconds to load. 10 seconds to load, and this plugin is running too slow, or the workflow is not performing. So what we want to bring in here is performance is something that should be thought of from the beginning of your project, even if it's a cloud service. And everything matters. The way you're designing the system, the way you're designing your user interaction, the way you're writing your code, each and every everything is going to impact the performance at the end. And I think the biggest focus should be how does the system behave or perform from an end user perspective, which is really key, because if you have an asynchronous process that actually runs a little slow, that is less concerning to me, rather than if you have something on the client side that's impacting your end user. Because if your end user is not happy, then they're not going to adopt the solution. So thinking from an end user perspective, even when it comes to performance, is super critical. And we'll talk about the approach that you want to take for performance. So we call it, we want to take a top-down approach, because we do want to first, look at the service or the code or the specific things, but we want to start from a user perspective, look at the network, or the last thing between the service and the user is the network connectivity, right? So we'll start from there. Then we will look at the solution that has been developed, and that's on your Dynamics 365 server, and finally we'll look from a service standpoint as well. So we're going to take this top-down approach when we are, when we're talking about performance optimization and what you can do to improve the performance and the experience for your end users. So hopefully you'll enjoy this, and you'll agree with our approach of discussing things top-down when it comes to performance. So just moving ahead. Just a little bit of overview. Like I mentioned, we're going to be starting with the client side. So because this is the experience that's closest to your end user, we're going to talk a little bit about the latency and the bandwidth. What are the recommended numbers or the recommended requirements that we have, or the minimum requirements in terms of latency and bandwidth, and also data center location, which is one of the key factors in determining what's the kind of latency and what's the experience that our users are going to have. We'll also talk a little bit about Fiddler and how you can use that to identify what's taking time, or what are the things that you can improve. It just gives you a view of what's the interaction between your client and your server, what's being cached, what's not being cached, and how you can optimize it. So it's a good way to analyze the traffic. The second area that we'll be talking about is the platform. So we are going to focus on the SDK. When you're performing any operations through the UI or through the SDK, how does it perform? Is the performance the same whether we are talking about performance from within your corporate network or when you're connecting from outside? And also look at plugins and workflows that get invoked, and share the best practices of what needs to be done from a platform point of view to get an optimal performance. And finally, we also have the database layer where there might be things like indexes from a platform side that can be created or managed to improve some of your query performance, etc. And security modeling is also a big piece. And again, this is something that we've seen is something that a lot of developers or customers don't consider, but security model, your BU design, the number of security roles that you have, and how you assign the security roles to your users, all this can have a significant impact on the performance. So that's again from a platform and from a database perspective. So this is primarily the top-down approach that we wanted to talk about: client, the solution, and the platform, and then finally at the database level. So going ahead, the first thing that we are going to be talking about is the client connectivity. And within the client connectivity, I think the first and the foremost, most important thing is to consider the location of your data center. So once you have bought your Dynamics 365 subscription, you get to wherever your tenant is located. By default, it's the same region where you'll have your Dynamics 365 instances also hosted within a data center in the same region. But the key point here is you need to look at where most of your users are. So, for example, you might have your data center in the EMEA, but you might have a lot of users who are using a system from Asia who are not going to get good performance. So that's not going to work very well. Again, depending on where majority of your users are residing, you have to choose an appropriate location of data center for your Dynamics 365 instance. And again, it's not very hard. This is something that can be tried out. So you can create trial instances in across various data centers, various locations, and you can run some quick tests in terms of latency to see how it's going to perform, and what's the latency if my instance, or if my production instance was deployed in this specific location. So that is something that can be tested, and we recommend that if you have global organizations where users are accessing the system across the world, you find a data center location that's most optimal for majority of the users. Again, it might be hard to keep everyone happy, but again, you have to keep at least most people happy by choosing an appropriate data center location. Just to quickly mention, we are bringing in future, we are bringing in some features and improvements which might let us handle this issue better, where if your users are in different regions, then they might still be able to get an optimal performance through a copy and read-only copies, etc. But all that is a part of the roadmap, and I'll not discuss much about it, but just so you know, that is something that's being considered, and we are working on it. So moving forward, once you've chosen the appropriate location of your data center, based on the initial tests that you ran and the latency numbers that you got, the next big thing that's between your service and your user is the network. And again, I think one of the biggest bottlenecks that we have seen is within the corporate network itself. There might be proxies that are causing issues, or just the routing within your corporate network may not be optimized, which might be adding significant amount of delay, and the latency might be increased just because of the corporate network. And this can be easily tested by trying to access the application from within your corporate network, or maybe from a different department, different branch offices, and then through public internet. And that's where you can see what's the impact or what's the overhead caused by your own corporate network. And we recommend that. And again, these things are something that can be tested well in the beginning, while you're starting your implementation, and after you have your instances ready. You need not wait for the project to go live and all the customizations to be done to test a lot of these simple latency stuff. And we highly recommend that you do these tests and make sure that they're optimal. If not, you can start working with the network teams within your organization to start optimizing the traffic for Dynamics 365, rather than going live and then experiencing slowness and delays, and then escalating things to your network team to optimize it. So again, proactively we can work on this, and that's our recommendation. So some of the things that you would focus on, primarily the latency and the bandwidth saturation. If that's happening, then if you need to get additional bandwidth based on the number of users who are parallelly using the system within the office, you can look at that. And also from a proxy perspective, if there's a lot of I've seen that sometimes when proxies are not configured appropriately, they can impact the caching behavior on the client side. So some of the things that should be cached might not be getting cached because proxy is changing some of the headers, and based on your policies that you have there, this can have a significant impact, and also it can add to the latency. In some cases, we've also seen that you can work with your ISP because and just to improve the routing to the Microsoft data center. A lot of times, that the ISP is routing the traffic in a very inefficient manner, and maybe the number of hops are too high. So you can closely work with your ISP in reducing the number of hops and reaching out to Microsoft data center much quicker. And we also have other third-party tools like Thousand Eyes that you can use to monitor your traffic, and how many hops, where is the latency exactly. I think that's a great tool to visually kind of show you where the issues are and why you're observing that slowness. Again, they're a third party, but if you have more questions around Thousand Eyes and how they can help, reach out to your fast track program manager, and they should be able to provide you guidance and connect you with the right people. So yeah, that's a very valuable tool. So that's mainly to do with the client connectivity. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to post it on the chat window, and we'll be happy to answer. And again, like it's mentioned, there's no silver bullet to performance. It's not just one thing that you can quickly fix, maybe just increase the bandwidth, anything that's going to fix all your performance problems. No, usually the solution is a combination of these factors, which needs to be figured out one by one, and you need to closely work with your network teams in optimizing all of these. So client-side connectivity. Here are some of the figures that we have, and again, the bandwidth, the recommended bandwidth should be greater than 400 kbps, kilobits per second, and the latency should be under 150 milliseconds. And how you can test it? We have a diagnostics page that you can just use your organization URL /tools/diagnostics and GIHE.aspx, and that's where you'll get the latency numbers. And this is something that's extremely simple to test, but can give you a lot of insight into why you're observing slowness. And sometimes we've heard that there is intermittent slowness. My system doesn't work on Tuesdays, or on Thursdays I observe slowness. So there might be something else that's happening within your network that is consuming the bandwidth, or that's impacting the performance on that specific day. So again, running these tests on at different times, and based on what you're hearing from your users and getting those numbers and sharing it with your network teams can be very, very helpful. Again, this is something that's an extremely simple way to quickly test some of the parameters of your network performance. When it comes to the latency under 150 milliseconds, the number there, again, this is I would say really the bare minimum for you to at least have acceptable performance. But if you really are looking for good performance, it's best to keep it 50 and under that. Then that's when your users will actually have a great performance. Anything above 150 milliseconds, the system is almost not usable, and we have seen that sometimes when customers who are having their data center in EMEA and users in China, they have had latencies above 200, 250 as well. In which case it is really challenging, and users don't adopt the system very well. So yeah, those are the baseline figures, I would say, but strive to achieve much lower latency, and that should make your end users really happy. The next topic that I want to talk about is caching a little bit, and again, from a server perspective, it's all managed by the platform. We use a lot of internal complex caching mechanisms, but from a client side, what's important is these settings are the simple set of instructions that have been given to add your sites to the cluster sites. Give enough space for it to store the cache on your browser. So your group policies, and that's where I've seen problems. A lot of organizations have very, very strict group policies, which might be restricting a lot of caching. Again, this can be because of the proxy, where they can change some of the headers and make sure that the information is not cached. The static resources will be fetched every single time that a user is trying to load the page, which can have a significant impact on performance. Again, it's if you're using, we use the word cold load, and if you're using private or incognito browsing, you might see that because you're not leveraging the cached information, the loads will be much slower. And if you've already loaded it once and then you're coming back to your web page, then you'll see that it loads much faster, and that's the warm loading. But the important bit here is to make sure that, and this is where you can use Fiddler to analyze what's being cached. Are the static resources being cached, or they are being requested every single time? Kind of analyze the traffic and see how it's performing. And also, based on this information, you can go back and adjust your group policy and your browser settings to enable proper client caching. So this is, again, most of these things are quite straightforward and simple, but you'll be surprised that we have seen a lot of significant escalations and issues because some of these basic things were not in place in the customer environment. So I think that's mainly to do with the client connectivity and the things that you can do from a client side and network to have optimal to have a Dynamics 365 perform optimally. The next section is solution optimization, And this is where I would hand it over to my colleague Nuno, who will be taking you through the solution optimization piece, and he'll share some of the best practices and the tips there. Over to you, Nuno.
Okay, thank you, Alok. This next topic about solution optimization will focus on some tips or suggestions for what we can do to optimize our solution using the user interface. Okay. Okay. So we also be focused on the search topic. Okay, and how can we customize our environment to reduce the heavy load on our queries. So looking for the quick finds, these are some fields that we try to avoid or even remove from the quick find settings. Okay, so the option set type of fields should be removed from our quick find searchable fields, as every time that we will store some data on this field, it will be stored as a number. So when we are trying to retrieve the same information, we will need several queries and inner joins to get the data and to do the search against it. Okay. The same, or it's similar with lookup fields. Okay, so this time we store with GUID as GUID, but so when we are searching for information on these fields, at least one inner join will be necessary, and the weight of the query in the SQL, it will be higher. Okay. About multiple lines type of fields. So these fields can store up almost 1 million of characters, and if we are doing quick finds against this type of fields, it can also degrade the user experience, and a quick find can take lots of seconds or even minutes to return any result. So that's why we should remove or minimize the usage of this type of fields. So this is on the user interface, quick finds view, and it can be changed easily. Moving forward. So here, 2 scenarios about how the end users will be able to execute the search, and how can we, or how should we educate these same end users. So on scenario 1, we are using a wildcard and using also a full name on the quick find view. Okay, so as the queries are optimized to not use wildcards, and every query will use the begin with on the sentence, on the SQL sentence, this will make as the index will not be used as expected, and the query will take longer to have the results. So our suggestion is to educate the users not use wildcards, and on the quick find settings, remove the full name, or at least add the first and the last name. So if the users are looking for the last name of someone, doesn't have to use the wildcard to get the result from a full name. Okay, and this will increase a lot of the user experience when searching, for example, for contacts. Okay, so as far as possible, we should use something similar to scenario 2 that we can have here. Okay, moving forward. So this is a personal setting that we also suggest to be as lower as possible with a default of 50 records per page. Okay, this is not something that we can set easily for all of users, and for that we need to use a third-party tool or even SDK or PowerShell. So, but then at the day after, some user can go back here again and change this record for example 250 records per page. So or once again we can educate our users and how we are suggesting and how we see the vision of the solution, or we can run at least, for example, a PowerShell script every month, and then we will force to go back to the 50 records per page. Let's go. Okay, so this data performance dashboard, it's something that it was included just a few time ago, and is included on Dynamics 365. And it's available from our user interface and from settings and administrations. So only system administrators will be allowed to use this feature. What this feature will do is to be monitoring the queries, and every time that it finds a query that is taking more than 3 seconds, and if it is identified that a new index will improve significantly the performance, it will appear here a record. Okay, so showing the entity, and then it will give us the option to create or not the index directly on the SQL database. The same way that we can create this index, then we can do the rollback and remove the index if we understand or it didn't work as expected or for some other reason. So another new feature, the relevant search. This one must also be enabled by a system administrator, and we must accept some legal information, as every time when using the relevant search, what we also are doing, it's using the Azure search index. Okay, so this what this will do, it's to perform the search against Azure platform, and will give us the results splitting by several relevance. So we will be able to see if we are looking, for example, for the word car, it will be, we can see how many records did we find in contacts, in the count, or any other custom entity or system entity. Okay. So as a side effect, let's say, enabling this feature and using the Azure, so it will increase the performance of a heavy search in a good way. So it will improve a lot the user experience on the solution. Let me go back here. And anyway, you can then switch back here. It's easy, and you can go back to the standard search. Okay, so let's move away a little bit from the search topics and the quick finds, and let's now see a little bit from the form loading or the rendering. Okay, so combining the power of the business process flow and automated functions with business rules, what this means, or what is our suggestion here, is if we are using, for example, a simple logic behind of the way that we can would like to display or load the form to the user, we should use business process flow or business rule or whatever, and avoid JScript here. Okay, because this will work best for the customer. Will be simple. We will avoid to load some libraries on the form load, and we will have some performance increase here. Okay, so on the other, if we expect to have a very complex logic behind the form, so we also should not use the business process flow or the business rules. And in this case, if we understand that using JScript, we can do all the logic with, let's say, 10 functions, 10 methods. Okay, so here we still suggest the JScript. Okay. So we are always also suggesting to, if you have subgrids fields on a tab and only a low percentage of that users will be looking for that same information, so we should always collapse that same tabs. Okay. The information will be loaded anyway, even if the tab is collapsed, but the rendering will be quicker if the tab is collapsed. The same thing to when we are creating and then optimizing the solution. So remove every field that it's unnecessary, okay, for the logic reasons, of course. So everything that we don't need, it should not be on the form. So it's very easy to remove, as you know, and there is no reason why we should keep these unused fields on the form. Okay, so this is more or less the same thing that I was discussing on the last slide. So to optimize the form loading, and if we can avoid or replace these JScript functions with the business rules, and if we understand that it's only 3 steps for a business rule, for example, so it's a good option to replace the JScript with these features that we offer with a product. Okay. If not, and if we are seeing big loading types on the forms, so it's a good starting point to go here and see which functions we are loading, which JScripts we are also have on the form load. As Alok also mentioned, with the fiddler, we can also see here, or from the fiddler, we can see what is loading and the execution time or the loading time for each function or for each library. Okay, so we can troubleshoot this using or the user interface, or go to the fiddler and understand what's been loading and the cost for the user. Okay. This performance center, it's not new and is very useful to also to understand the behavior of the form loading. Okay. At any point of dynamics, okay, you are already authenticated, then you can press Control-Shift-E keys, Control-Shift-Q in IE, and this will display this window that we can see here. After that, we click Enable, and we can load the account form, for example, and it will display something like this. So we can see how much time it took to the form be ready. Okay, the JScript that was loaded, the execution time for it, if we have subgrids, for example, if you have 15 subgrids, it will be possible to see it here, all the 15s and the execution time or loading time for each of them. And at the end, if we can also copy this visual information that we are seeing for a text, so we can also see in detail which object took how much time to load. Okay. If we are using another browser as Chrome, for example, instead of the Control-Shift-Q, we should use Control-Shift-E to have the same tool available. Moving forward. Okay. This is some other small settings that we can change that at the end, in the overall, it could improve a lot our solution. Okay. So this is also with the mindset that if we don't use, then we should disable. Okay, so for example, the autosave is something that we should discuss at least what will be around this feature and see if for this specific solution, which option should be selected. Okay, I understand that for most of the cases, yes, the autosave will be great and save a lot of time for the end users. But imagine that we have a lot of workflows, plugins around the save action. So every time that the product is auto-saving, then we'll be running the same process in the background, and it could lead us to some performance issues. Okay, so it's not a generic suggestion. So it's something that we should plan and then configure against the best option. IAM presence. Very few customers use this option, and it's more oriented with the call centers. And once again, if we are not using, if we don't expect to use in any way, it's something that we should also remove since the beginning. Big maps. So some of the customers think, okay, I just remove the grid or the object from the form, so everything is okay. I'm not using Bing Maps, but even if it's not on the form, but if it's not disabled here on the system settings, we're still getting some requests to the Bing Maps endpoint, okay, in the background. And if we run a fiddler, we can see even if the form doesn't have this object, we are requesting the data from that and spending time with it, unnecessary spending time. So it's something that we should also remove. Since CRM 2015, we also launched Turbo Forms. It's the name that it's most heard. Let's say like this, and it's replacing or already replaced the legacy form rendering. Okay, so one of the main difference between the Turbo Form and the old legacy ones, it's the amount of objects that we are caching during the form rendering. Okay, this has an impact. So the cold boot, or the first time that we are opening a record on or an entity, let's say like this, we expect to have a higher loading time that the other ones. Okay, so for example, the first one will take 5 seconds for the account, for example, and then the other ones will take only 2 seconds. If you close the browser, you end the session. If you connect again, authenticate, this same behavior will happen again. So the first one, it will be slower, and then the other ones we expect to have a great user experience there. Okay. If you open an account, then we'll open some contacts, some other records, and then you move to the account. This will not be seen as a cold boot, and we also expect here to have a small loading time. Okay. Just now moving again to Alok.
Yeah, thanks, Nuno. So while I load this and start presenting, just a quick reminder that Debbie has posted the link for the feedback. So please use that to provide us your feedback and whatever you think about this session. It's super important for us to keep improving and bringing better sessions to you. So make sure that you take a look at that and submit your feedback. So the next topic for us is code optimization, and again we're not gonna go very, very deep on this topic, but at a basic level, what are the, and again this is something that we have seen, we have observed in a lot of scenarios where some extremely basic things that you can do in the code can have a significant impact on your performance. So we're just going to discuss some of the most basic code optimization techniques to deliver an optimal performance. So the first one is related to the plugins, and again, plugins have been something where we have an option to run them asynchronously, and in a lot of cases I've seen that it's necessary to run them synchronously, maybe on the create or on the save operation. But what's important is we need to consider, wherever possible, we should ensure that we are using asynchronous wherever it's possible. But in some cases, I know that it's not avoidable, and you have to do synchronous plugins. In those cases, keep it simple, and especially in scenarios where you might have complex plugins that are interacting with an external service that's hosted elsewhere, maybe on-prem, and you try to save a record and it takes 20 seconds. That's because your synchronous plugin is trying to make external calls, and it's waiting on the response from that, and the entire form, everything is frozen for your end user till all of that process takes place. So it's super important to consider the impact of the plugins that you're developing on the user experience as well. So keep them asynchronous wherever possible, and if synchronous, keep them simple. And also, you must be aware that there's a limit of 2 minutes on this plugin, so it has to complete its execution within 2 minutes. If not, it's going to time out. So it's super important to keep it extremely, I would say, simple in the synchronous cases. Filtering attributes, and again, this is an extremely simple step that can help improve the performance of all your update plugins. So, and in general, I've seen that a lot of devs actually miss this, and this comes up when we are doing performance reviews with our customers. On update operations, if you don't choose the filtering attribute, then this plugin is going to execute for every single update. You update any field on the record, and the plugin is going to run, because there's no specific filtering criteria that you have specified, and that can have a very bad impact on the performance. And usually business processes don't involve running a plugin on updating any field. Typically, there might be a set of fields based on which you have put your logic in the plugin. So if you don't use filtering attributes, the plugin will be triggered, and it's going to go see there that, okay, it has nothing to do, and it's just going to exit. But that itself can have impact on your performance. So make sure that you understand what are the attributes and when a plugin should fire the update operation, and choose filtering attributes. The other important thing is retrieve messages. So you have the ability to go and register a plugin on the retrieve or a retrieve multiple message. I've seen scenarios where customers try to do this, and maybe from a security perspective, because whenever anything is being retrieved, they want to understand who is looking at it, should they be looking at it, and they try to log that information somewhere, or even control the behavior. So if you're trying to do that through a retrieve or retrieve multiple, then that's not the best way, because it's going to have a significant impact, because retrieve and retrieve multiple will work across all the entities. So it doesn't matter. Maybe you're just looking at a view, or anything that you do within the system, you're going to have these retrieve multiple plugins running, and even the retrieve. So if it is security related, your requirement, try to manage that through security rules and your security modeling. If you have more questions, again, reach out to your fast track program manager, work with them closely, but avoid using plugins on retrieve multiple or retrieve, because that retrieve is still better, but retrieve multiple is one that can have very, very bad impact on the performance, and sometimes unexpected behavior as well. The next thing I want to talk about is again, for the async operations, make sure that you check the box to delete if the async operation completes successfully, because if you go and look into the org insights, a lot of customers are consuming their storage very, very quickly, because the async operation base table is just getting filled up with these operations, and they don't get deleted even after it's successful. So if it is successful, there's no need for you to go back, review or do anything. All the failures and the ones that have not succeeded will anyways be there for you to debug and understand what's going wrong. So if everything goes fine, it's best to delete the async operation logs. Again, from a plugin perspective, like I mentioned, it's important to keep all your plugins in asynchronous mode wherever possible, because synchronous plugins can seriously impact the performance, especially if they're doing any complex operations. So that was a little bit on how can you relook at your plugins to improve the performance, and what are the do's and don'ts there. So the next topic, and again, this must sound extremely simple, but in a lot of retrieve queries and retrieve operations, we see that we just choose a simple path of, give me all the columns. And what you don't realize is that a lot of these entities might have, columns, 100, 200 columns. And even though we want to update or, just look at one field, when we're designing our queries, we just say new column set true, which will return all the columns. And it is significantly impacting your performance. Even it seems like a really small thing, but can have a very, very high impact. So it's super important to limit the columns that you're retrieving and only focus on the data that you need, and just retrieve that. Sounds super simple. One of the most common things that I've seen that comes up in our code reviews is we retrieving all the columns. So again, just a reminder. I know that everyone is aware of this, but just another reminder. And the same applies even for your web API or the client-side calls that you're making. Execute multiples. So execute multiples are again, this is something that's super important. Primarily more used in your integration and data migration scenarios. And the biggest advantage of execute multiple is it lets you package a set of requests together in a single request. So all the network latency of sending multiple requests, and on each and every request you have to there's latency associated with it. Plus there is additional network header for each request. So all that is managed, and you can include multiple requests in the payload of a single request. So that's really execute multiple. And it is super helpful, and we have seen that in migration and integration scenarios, it can have significant improvement in performance by using execute multiple. So wherever possible, try to use execute multiple if you can, bundle your requests together and send them together for the server to manage, rather than sending them individually. There are some throttling limits on the execute multiple. You can have only 2 concurrent execute multiple requests running on a server running for instance at any point of time, and you can have maximum up to 1,000 requests inside the execute multiple requests. Again, you cannot have execute multiple requests inside execute multiple requests, so that kind of cascading is not allowed. And again, the 1,000 item limit is something that needs to be looked at, because it doesn't mean that just because an execute multiple request can hold 1,000 items, adding 1,000 items is the most optimal way of getting maximum performance. No, usually that number is much lower, and in this example, you can see that a batch size of 20 to 50 is also good. I've seen in data migrations where batch size of 200 also works really well. So you don't have to go all the way to 1,000 to get best performance. Usually, it's a sweet spot in between that you can try it and see what gives you the best performance. Again, if there's something that you're doing, for example, you're running a data migration over the weekend, or if you have an integration that needs to go through quickly, you can reach out to your fast track program manager or to support to increase the throttling limit for your concurrent execute multiple requests. So let's say we might change it to 5. So in that way, you can parallelly have 5 execute multiple requests running on an instance, which can improve the overall throughput for your migration or integration scenario. Again, if you have any performance challenges and you think that you need to increase the limit, please reach out to your fast track program manager, and they can assist you with that. And again, carefully choose your batch size, which is another key thing, like I mentioned. And if you see the graph on the right hand side, I think it gives a pretty good picture of what's the performance improvement that you get with the use of execute multiple. You can see that in case of individual requests, it was taking almost 45 seconds, and we were able to achieve that within 5 seconds by using a batch size of 50, I believe. So that's really the advantage and the significant improvement that you get when using execute multiple. So always consider using this for all your integration and migration scenarios, and find the optimal batch size. On the next topic, again, this is disable keep alive when calling web services from plugins, and this is again something that I recommend that you can test and try this out, but the keep alive is by default true, and if you set that to false, then usually on the service end, there aren't so many open connections, which it'll actually save memory on the end of the web service. But from a plugin, if you're calling these web services, you can avoid the attempts to use expired sessions. So we recommend that you use keep alive false. So after the request, it'll automatically close the connection, which can help you improve the performance of your service as well. So this is another quick tip. Code optimization. So this is again, I think this has been highlighted in the SDK quite clearly, is that we should avoid the use of global variables within our plugins. The reason being the plugin instances are cached, and every time the plugin runs, we don't flush the memory and we don't reload the plugin into the memory, but we use the same instance that was cached, and we do this for performance reasons, meaning that if you're using global variables, there won't be any thread safety. So avoid using global variables, but you can use static variables as they're disposed by the app domain. So from an architecture perspective, the way our plugins work, you should avoid using global variables because they can cause thread safety issues. So that's another tip. And this is again an important one. I've seen numerous scenarios where the user on the form, the entity form is frozen because there is a synchronous JavaScript call that's happening in the background that is just frozen into display, and the user is not able to do anything else. So completely avoid as much as possible using synchronous JavaScripts on your in your client scripts, because it can have a very, very bad impact in terms of the user experience for your end user. So super important to make sure that these requests are asynchronous and the user is not blocked from performing any other operations. It's a very critical point, and make sure that you take care of this. So with this, I think we have come to the conclusion slide. I'm just quickly going to go through this because I know we don't have much time. So I want to give at least a couple of minutes for Q&A. So what we looked at was from a connectivity perspective, your data center location, bandwidth, latency, and working with your ISP and your internal network teams for optimized routing. From a solution perspective, we looked at views, quick finds, reports, form loading, and how to improve the queries and using concept of indexes, etc. And from a development standpoint, I think basic points but important points are to not use global variables. Think about the number of columns and avoid the use of synchronous JavaScript calls. Again, these at level 200, I think we've covered the basics of what one needs to be aware of when designing for Dynamics 365 and how they can have a solution that works well. So with that, we've come to the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please post them in the window. We'll be more than happy to answer. I know we just have 2 minutes, but in case we're not able to answer, you can always reach out to your Fast Track program manager for more detailed response, or you can always reach out to us. So go ahead and ask us any questions, and don't forget to provide your feedback before you leave.
Great. So while we're waiting for those questions to come in, do either of you have any final words before we conclude our recording?
I think there are no questions, so I think that's it, and I'll hang on for a couple more minutes to answer any questions. And yeah, that's it, Debbie.
All right, thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the recorded portion of today's Partner Infopedia web conference. The recording will be available on this same registration site within 24 hours. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.